Step into the aftermath of a failed digital transformation, and the damage isn't always visible in the hardware. The servers are still humming, the power is still on, but behind the screens, a total structural collapse has already occurred. This chart tracks the reality of global IT delivery. Only 48% of projects cross the finish line successfully. The remaining 52% stall out, exceeding their budgets or simply failing to launch. Most often, the victim is a small to medium enterprise, but company size tells us very little about operational maturity. You can find startups that operate with militant precision and billion-dollar enterprises that function in complete disorganized chaos. We have more advanced cloud infrastructure and management tools than at any point in history. So why are more than half of these projects still dying on the vine? If the technology works, then the failure isn't technical. The mortality rate suggests a persistent breakdown in the human element. To find the culprit, we have to look at the systems we've built. Let's look at the modern AI-powered management stack. At the top is the brain. Large language models can now instantly generate blueprints, draft project charters, and even predict potential risks based on historical data. Below that is the interface layer. This is where we use accessible tools like Google Sheets or Notion, platforms with a low barrier to entry that allow team members to feed data into the system in real time. Finally, the nervous system connects it all. Automation tools like N8N route that data directly into the execution layer, the ERPs and task boards where the actual work lives. This stack is automated, comprehensive, and highly capable. The tools themselves are innocent. They are simply the instruments being misdirected. The vulnerability isn't in the tools, but in the planning phase. This is where the process begins to fail. The first point of failure is a breakdown in translation. A client asks for a broad goal, a smart inventory system. But if that isn't mapped into specific, trackable system requirements, there is an unreconciled disconnect. The developers are building toward a target that hasn't been defined. Then we see the Bole trap. In many SMEs, there is a cultural pressure to say yes to every minor client request mid-project without pausing to evaluate the impact. Every unvetted request requires developer time. Without a system to track these changes, the project slowly bleeds out its budget and its timeline. This happens because the project manager is acting as a passive order taker. They are focusing on checking boxes rather than thinking strategically about the project's survival. Software doesn't just break. Projects die because of a long series of unchecked minor human concessions. To keep a project alive, the manager must stop being a passive observer and start being an active enforcer of the project's boundaries. The first law is clarity. You must use the AI stack to define the blueprint so thoroughly that every requirement maps directly to a trackable task. If it isn't in the task board, it doesn't exist. The second law is control. You must track every minute of time cost. When you have total visibility into where the hours are going, you can stop the budget from leaking before it becomes fatal. The third law is decision. When a client asks for a small change, the manager must ruthlessly question if it supports the original goal. If it doesn't, they must have the courage to say no. Enforcing clarity, control, and decision is the only proven antidote to scope creep. It is the project's primary defense mechanism. By the year 2030, the daily responsibilities of a manager will look very different than they do today. Because our AI stacks are already handling blueprints, data routing, and reporting, the routine coordination of a project is being automated. Current trends suggest that by 2030, 80% of these routine management tasks will be handled by the system itself. But an algorithm cannot negotiate with a resistant stakeholder. It cannot manage the fear of job loss in a small business, or navigate the cultural friction of a team in transition. Perfect management is a myth. Survival simply requires a manager who uses the tools for efficiency, but remains the human firewall against chaos.